The 2022-23 season did not go the way that Pistons fans expected it. The expectation was that this fun, young, dynamic backcourt of Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey was going to be very entertaining at the very least. And although Jaden Ivey was very entertaining and had a very good rookie season, unfortunately Cade Cunningham was limited to 12 games and was the biggest reason why the Pistons struggled as much as they did. There was still some very good play from their bigs, most notably rookie Jalen Duren, as well as the acquired James Wiseman. And it's also worth a reminder that the Pistons are only a few years into this rebuild and didn't rebuild with anything to kickstart it. There was no Kevin Durant trade, there was no Rudy Gobert trade, there was no James Harden trade like the Rockets are currently building off of. The Pistons started with a Luke Kennard trade, which gave them the pick for Saddiq Bey, which now gave them James Wiseman. So patience is still required, time is still required, but there's still some signs of positivity in Detroit. As previously mentioned, Cade Cunningham was limited to only 12 games throughout this season, but he did play relatively well in those 12 games. It's very evident that Cade is going to be a future star in the league. He has very elite playmaking upside, he has elite shot making and shot creation upside, and he looks to be someone that's going to be very impactful on the defensive end, especially when you consider the fact that he is 6'6" at the point guard position. The hardest part of any rebuild is to find that potential superstar caliber guy, and the Pistons already have him in Cade Cunningham. They've got the easiest part of their rebuild done. Jaden Ivey might not have been the media darling of rookies throughout this season, and he might not even be all rookie first team. He started off the season with a bang, showing off his elite athleticism, his ability to get to the rim, his ability to draw fouls, especially while he was playing next to Cade, something we will get to see a lot more of next season. But throughout the year, especially as he had to not play next to Cade, he became a much better passer and creator for this offense, and showed that he can be a bit more of a combo guard if needed and take on some of those playmaking roles, but can also just score and get to the rim and be a bucket when that is his role, that he will have more so next to Cade Cunningham. But he also has shown that he can run this offense and be the primary guy. Killian Hayes had his best season yet of his career in the 2022-23 season, and even though he might not have quite lived up to the hype of his draft selection, and he isn't likely going to be a starting guard for the Pistons, he's still shown that he could end up being a solid NBA guard. His playmaking and decision-making has improved, his ability to create his own shot has improved, and his efficiency still doesn't look great, but as he falls back into more of a secondary role with the return of Cade Cunningham next season, I think we'll truly get a true assessment as to whether Killian Hayes is a legit backup point guard in the NBA. Isaiah Stewart showed some positive strides of development throughout his third year in the league. He improved significantly as a three-point shooter. He jumped from 0.6 three-point attempts a night to over 4. He's shown that he's likely more of a power forward than he is a center, and partly that's just due to his skill set, and part of it is just due to the fact that Jalen Duren had such a great rookie season. Jalen Duren will likely make an all-rookie team, and despite being amongst one of the youngest players in the league, he transitioned to the league quite quickly and effectively. There was not a significant transition period where Duren really struggled in the league. From day one, he looked like a legit NBA big. He plays with a high level of energy, he's a great rebounder, he's very efficient around the rim, he has good hands, he has good touch around the rim, and it looks like we're just touching the bottom of the barrel in terms of what Jalen Duren could potentially develop to be as a Detroit Piston. James Wiseman, the former top 3 pick, finally got some regular, pressure-free playing time in Detroit. Obviously, he's gotten some run in Golden State at times, but the leash is pretty short when you're playing for a title-contending team, or at the very least, a team that has aspirations to contend for a title. That pressure is just not there in Detroit, and that benefited James Wiseman well, as he's looked quite effective as a lob threat and a rim roller, and there's still some questions about his game, rebounding at times in the defensive end in general, and pick and roll defense at times. Sure, there's still question marks, but there's no doubt that James Wiseman has potential to be an NBA caliber big. But whether he should be starting over Jalen Duren as he has for a large stretch of his time in Detroit, I would probably lean that Duren should be that starter. Marvin Bagley seems to be the least mentioned of the 4 prominent Detroit Pistons bigs, and part of that is likely just the fact that, again, he struggled with injuries this season, playing only about half the season. And he continued his relatively good efficiency that he had last year in Detroit and improved his efficiency from three. But where his role fits between Jalen Duren, James Wiseman, Isaiah Stewart, that remains a little bit more unclear. And depending on how the draft goes, it's possible he becomes the odd man out, especially if Victor Wembanyama comes to town. The wing area is definitely of most concern still on this Pistons roster. Of course, they just moved off Saddiq Bey. However, that leaves you with Isaiah Livers, whose game I like, and I think he is a solid three-point shooter. He's going to be able to continue to improve from that area and shown that he's going to be a key rotational player for this team, if nothing else. But he doesn't have significant upside and likely isn't going to be a key guy playing 30 to 35 minutes a night for this team. Their other notable wing, of course, is Bojan Bogdanovic, and he had another great year. There's no doubt about that. He continues to be a very good shooter, a good secondary option as a scorer, and is a very valuable vet on a very young team. But obviously, Bojan's not going to be a future key wing on this team when these guys are pushing for playoff appearances and beyond. So who and how they figure out their wing talent for their core pieces for their future is definitely the biggest concern around the Detroit Pistons' current roster. Isaiah Livers and Bojan Bogdanovic are certainly a lot more devoid of talent and of youth than, say, Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey, that backcourt looks great, and their bigs in Jalen Duren, James Wiseman, Isaiah Stewart, and even Marvin Bagley. The most significant part of this offseason for the Pistons, of course, is going to be the draft. They contain their own first and second round picks and will have the best odds at winning the lottery, and will also have the 31st overall pick. Ultimately, the Pistons just got to hope for some ping pong luck. They already got it once with Cade, so you can't really be mad as a Pistons fan if you don't get it again. But of course, everyone's going to want Victor. With regards to free agency, it should be a relatively small summer for the Pistons. They do have a good amount of free agents, but none of which are any bit significant or going to be core parts of their future. Hamidou Diallo is an unrestricted free agent, and he's been relatively efficient from the field, but has struggled from three this year. Injuries have kept him out for the majority of the season, and given the fact that he has struggled from three, I wouldn't be surprised that his tenure in Detroit is over. Corey Joseph is the unrestricted free agent that I would most expect the Detroit Pistons to entertain in re-signing. Joseph continues to remain a fairly productive backup point guard, even as he continues into
38-26 though.
Most importantly, is a very good leader and a very valuable veteran on a very young team. Whether he's back in a one-year deal or a multi-year deal, that remains to be seen, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him back in a Pistons uniform next season. Rodney McGruder is another unrestricted free agent who is still a solid three-point shooter, but he's obviously not part of the Pistons' future long-term, and I would not expect him to be brought back personally for next season. Alex Burks is another veteran guard who could be back, and if indications are from Corey Joseph's camp that he is not interested in re-signing with the Detroit Pistons, then Alex Burks might be back because he's on a team option and is another solid vet who can give the Pistons some backup guard minutes. And it's another veteran presence, and you need a couple of guys who can be a veteran presence on young teams to show the way and show that level of leadership. And Bojan's going to be one of those guys, but Alex Burks could be one of those guys if Corey Joseph is not him, as Alex Burks gets some of the backup guard minutes alongside Killian Hayes. I wouldn't expect much on the trade front from the Detroit Pistons this summer. They're not really at a stage to buy in, but they're certainly not at a stage where they're looking to move off of former stars who were on former playoff teams with this group. Of course, Bojan Bogdanovic has been in and out of trade rumors for the last couple of years. Of course, he just got flipped to Detroit, then he signed his extension. I would expect at this point now he's probably only moved with 1 year left on the deal. Unless the Pistons are really, really bad come the trade deadline, I would expect he's at least on the Pistons through the 2023-24 season, with the potential that he then gets moved in the following offseason or before the following trade deadline. Outside of that, there's not likely to be a significant decision this offseason, but the Pistons are going to have to make a decision amongst their bigs. James Wiseman only has 1 year left on his rookie deal. Marvin Bagley has 2 years left on the contract that the Pistons gave him. Jalen Duren, of course, is locked up long-term, still with 3 years left on his rookie deal. Beef Stew is nearing the end of his rookie deal. And considering the fact that Victor Wembanyama could be on this team, the Pistons have to make a decision about their bigs, because Marvin Bagley James Wiseman, Jalen Duren, and Beef Stew cannot all be paid significant money. Because Marvin Bagley right now is probably number 4 in the depth chart, and he's getting relatively significant money. I mean, it's not substantial, but he's getting over $10 million a year, and that's probably not the type of money you want to be giving to a guy who is your 4th big, considering the talent that is ahead of him. And so I don't expect it to be this offseason unless they get the first overall pick, and then maybe they decide to move off of someone because Victor is arriving. But within the next 6 to 12 months heading into next offseason, don't be surprised if the Pistons move off of one of these bigs, because I doubt they're going to let Isaiah Stewart or James Wiseman walk for free in free agency, but I also highly doubt they're going to maintain and retain all 4 of these bigs. Wiseman and Beef Stew could both get a contract, but that probably means that Marvin Bagley's getting moved. Despite the fact that the development continues to be going relatively well in Detroit, this is a team that's probably still a bit too devoid of talent to be making a legit playoff push to the 2023-24 season. As mentioned, this wasn't a rebuild that was kickstarted by any star trade. It was going to require some time and some patience, and the dividends are starting to show. It's just looking a little bit worse than it actually is because of the injury to Cade Cunningham this season. If Cade Cunningham is healthy, this team looks a lot better, given they didn't play that great with him to start the year, but they're probably not comfortably the worst record in the league. And certainly next year, assuming Bojan doesn't get shut down throughout the back half of the season, and assuming some more health, this can be a team that starts to look a little bit more like this year's version of the Magic. Do I expect them to make the play-in? Personally, no, and part of that is just due to the fact that no one else is really rebuilding in the East right now. As just mentioned, Orlando are barely outside the play-in next year. They're going to be pushing to make the play-in tournament next year at the very least. The Wizards, although not great, continue to want to win. The Pacers are much better than expected, and they're going to want to continue to win next year. And the Charlotte Hornets struggled this year, but are a team that regularly has been in the play-in over the last few years. And they were without LaMelo Ball for a significant portion of the season, and have had one of the best defenses in the league since the All-Star break. So I would expect that everyone's looking to win next year in the East. No one is really truly in the rebuild phase anymore unless the Nets completely tank during the offseason. So even though the Pistons are going to be better next year, it's going to be a very, very difficult Eastern Conference with no one looking to rebuild. So everyone's going to be wanting to win on every single night. Everyone's going to want to, at the very least, make the play-in. And that means there's going to be some odd teams out, and that's probably the Pistons for next year. But I'd expect more continued improvement from their young talent. I'd expect a better showing night to night, even if the record is not significantly better. But ultimately for the Pistons, they're probably a year away still, and there's nothing wrong with that. They just need some ping pong luck this summer so they can get Victor and hopefully push the timeline just a little bit further ahead.